Welcome everybody again to the Census Product Live demo. My name is Parker Rogers. I am the data community advocate here at Census, and I will be the host of this demo. So if you guys have any questions in the chat, I will be the one that looks at those and make sure that they get answered. Your questions might get answered during Olia's live demo, or we might wait till halftime or the end of the demo to answer all of them. And with no further ado, I introduce you guys to Olia Tanner, our
Hey
customer data
everyone,
architect.
my name is Olia, like Parker said, and I am a customer data architect here at Census. Apologies today, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so I recorded parts of today's demo last night to make sure everything ran smoothly today. So it's not quite live everywhere, but it's still very good for you guys. And I did see some questions come through when everyone registered for the event, and some of those should be answered in the demo itself. But like Parker said, if you have any additional questions throughout, please feel free to write them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. And with that, we can get started. Let me share my screen here. All right, we should be good to go.
Perfect.
All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. Before we get into the product demo of Census, I wanted to cover some of our favorite use cases for customer data. First, Census has the power to provide you with the best 360-degree view of your customers. Whether you have 5 tools or 50, Census can unify this siloed data across everything, so your team doesn't have to go to 50 different places to understand what they need to know about your customer base. Second, Census allows you to build whatever lead scoring models fit your needs. Whether you need a product qualified lead or a marketing qualified lead model, you can build it and deploy it with Census. And finally, Census is your best friend when it comes to segmentation and creating audiences. You can send personalized emails, re-engage inactive users with targeted ads, or even promote new features to users who will benefit the most from their release. There are tons of other use cases you can find on our website for any team, from marketing to sales to analytics to customer success. All right, now let's get to the demo. Today I'm going to show you step-by-step how to use Census to easily bring your customer data from your data warehouse into tools such as Salesforce, Amplitude, and more. Let's start with Salesforce. We'll be looking to bring in trial start date data to enrich our existing contacts. As you can see here, I have an existing report in Salesforce with some contact information such as name and email. Some contacts have the trial start dates populated, but most don't. Let's fix that with Census so this data gets into Salesforce and we can ensure it's populated going forward. In Census, I first need to set up my connection. This includes both the data sources, where the customer data lives, as well as the service connections, or destinations, where I want to send this data to. As you can see, I've already added my Redshift data warehouse using the standard configuration details. Here, I've already filled out the necessary configuration fields: hostname, port, database name, username, and password. If you plan on having more than one data warehouse connection, or just want to rename it to something more readable, you also have the option to add that label here. Once my connection is set up, I can also test the connection to make sure that it works as intended. You'll see that I've also already added Salesforce as a service connection using the necessary configuration credentials. You can always find instructions on connecting to a data warehouse or service destination in our documentation online at docs.getcensus.com. But generally in this case, once you create a new Salesforce connection here, you'll be redirected to Salesforce to verify the connection request, and then you'll be brought back to the Census Connections page and you'll be ready to roll. So now that I've added my connections, let's go ahead and create a model to identify the subset of customer data I want to sync to Salesforce. Census models currently come in 3 flavors: Sql Models, dbt projects, and Looker Looks. For our demo, we'll be using Sql Models, but I'll touch briefly on the other 2 options. Census supports connecting to an existing dbt project, which allows you to select models you want to make available to sync into all your business tools. This means you can keep all your source code and transforms in a single repository. Census then compiles your models on the fly whenever a sync is scheduled, so your data and your models are always up to date. And Census is designed to work hand in hand with dbt Cloud or any other dbt runner. This is a great option if dbt is an integral part of your data stack. Census also supports connecting to an existing Looker environment, which allows you to build Looker looks with Looker's powerful visual builder, and then sync the data to any of your business apps. Census compiles your models on the fly whenever a sync is scheduled, so your data and your models are always up to date. This is a great option if Looker is an integral part of your data stack. Now let's get back to the Sql models. Census allows you to write Sql queries to identify the subset of data to sync into a service connection. If the dataset has already been transformed in the data warehouse, my Sql query may be as simple as a select star statement, like we see here. On the other hand, if I need to create something that's a little bit more complicated, I can do that as well. Remember the scoring I mentioned as a popular Census use case? As you can see here, I define what a lead score is in this query itself. For our demo today, I already have a Sql query ready for the data we are looking to bring into Salesforce. Let's run the preview to see that it works. This looks good. Since we didn't change anything in the model, we'll go ahead and head back to the Overview tab to touch on one last thing: status. You can approve models in Census to control what models can be used for audiences so the marketing team only uses trusted data. I'm going to go ahead and approve this model, and we'll get back to this a little bit later when we cover the segments feature in the product. But now that we're done with the model piece, the final step is to actually create a sync. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and click Create a Sync right here. We'll start by selecting the data we want to sync. The connection is the data warehouse where the data lives, in our case, Redshift. And the source is the Sql model we just looked at. Now we need to configure where this model is being synced to. So we'll go ahead and select our Salesforce instance and the contact object. Oops, scroll a little bit too far. Okay, perfect. At this point, we can choose how changes to the source are synced. In our case, we'll choose Update or Create because we want Census to update existing destination records when the mapping key matches, and create new ones if the data is missing. And finally, we'll choose the mapping key. Here, we'll select email since that's the main identifier in our Salesforce report. Now we want to select the fields we want to update with values from our model. This will auto-match the field names, but in case one needs to be changed or one is missing, you can easily identify the right field name yourself. You do have the option once again to test your sync if you'd like, but we'll just go ahead and continue with the whole data set. If you want to create the sync but run it later, you can feel free to leave the checkbox for Run a Sync Now empty. But we'll go ahead and select it so the sync begins to run. And the sync has started running. So it looks like our sync is finally complete. And if I go back to our initial Salesforce report, we should see that every contact there has a populated trial start date data point. Let's check it out. Click on this report over here. And yep, it looks like the data is in there. Let's just scroll all the way down to make sure nothing's missing. Nope, it looks like every single trial start date here is populated. Awesome. So let me go back to Census to cover a few of the sync details. We'll start with the Sync History tab. There were no rejected records in the destination, meaning Salesforce accepted all the records Census sent over, but there were 6 invalid records in the source. Let's see what happened there. It looks like there are some emails that are duplicates here. Since we use email as the mapping identifier for the sync, any records of the same email won't be synced over to Salesforce until we deduplicate them in some way. Let's move on to the Activity tab. Here's where you'll see any activity that occurs, such as when someone, or you, removes or adds fields or changes the sync schedule. So you'll know what happened and when with this sync specifically. The Alerts tab lets you set up your preferences for when you'd like to be notified if something goes wrong with the connection. So either the source or the destination connection fails in some way, or when a specific portion of the records are invalid in the source or rejected from the destination. We also do have our new live API inspector, which helps teams dig deep and debug issues when your API calls aren't behaving the way you expect them to. Basically here, you get role-level visibility into the API calls Census makes to the destination service to sync your data, so you can track and fix errors as they happen in real time. It's pretty neat. And finally, let's touch on the configuration tab. Something I'll point out here are various sync triggers. There is the option to leave your sync without a schedule, which means you'll have to come into the Census product and manually select Sync Now every single time you want to run the sync. There are, of course, other options as well, including hourly, continuous, and even cron. If you connect Census to your dbt cloud, you can trigger syncs when a dbt cloud job completes. And finally, you can use orchestration tools like Airflow to trigger syncs programmatically with this token here via API. All right, so that was a lot of info to take in. So we're about halfway through, so I'll pause there. I think there's a couple of questions in the chat. Parker, do you want to start with any of them? I think you're muted.
One of those moments. Okay, so the first one is from Charlotte. She asked, is it still a requirement to set up a specific warehouse dedicated to Census?
Sweet. Yeah, it looks like you already answered. So the warehouse doesn't have to be dedicated to Census. I think maybe Charlotte was potentially asking whether you needed a Census-specific schema, in which case you do need a Census-specific schema because that's where we're going to store all the data in terms of the diffs in between every sync that we run. So just covering both bases there.
Okay. And Charlotte, let us know if that answers your question clearly. Also, Nicholas just, as he's new to Census, so he wants to know really what the product is. Essentially, it allows you to move data from your data warehouse to any of your operational tools. So Olia just showed us an example where she moved data from a data warehouse into Salesforce. So that's just the gist of it. And then Demetrios asked, what would happen if the same email had two demo start dates? Would one of the two be loaded into Salesforce, or would there be an error in Census?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I showed the invalid records there. So basically what would happen if it's the same email and the email is the identifier, Census wouldn't sync either of the records because we don't know which one's correct. So what you'd have to do is either to duplicate it in some way and say, hey, this is the correct one, it's actually this date, or you'd have to use a different identifier such as a Salesforce ID or another unique ID, in which case then we would sync both. It kind of just depends on what your data actually looks like.
Okay, and great question, Steve. What is a continuous schedule?
Yeah, so I can take this one. A continuous schedule is essentially basically running the sync every 1 or 2 minutes, I believe. So as often as we can, as continuously as we can. Obviously, if one run is taking longer, we're not just going to kick off a new run until the run finishes. So if it takes a couple minutes, the next one will be skipped. But a continuous schedule is kind of as close as we can get to, I guess, a real-time sync.
Okay, perfect. And with that, we'll answer the additional questions at the end. Unless, Olia, you want to add anything before you jump back into it?
No, I can jump back in. Thanks. So let's say I forgot to add a column to my Salesforce report. The last seen field exists in my model, but it doesn't exist in my sync. Does this mean I have to start over and create an entirely new sync? Thankfully, no. I can go back to my Salesforce report and add in the column that I want. Last session. So we'll go ahead and click edit here in my report. And we can search for the last session field. And then we can save this report. We'll go ahead and close it. Oh, let's open it back up. And as we can see, there's nothing populated here for last session for any of these contacts. So I can return to Census and add the mapping to the sync we created earlier. So we'll go ahead and make sure we refresh the fields available to us. It'll take a few seconds. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and click Add Mapping and select Last Session from the Salesforce side and map it to last seen from our model, since that's what this timestamp is called in our census model. Then I'll go ahead and click Update. And since we're adding a new field, this will be a full sync again. So I'm going to click Run a Sync Now like I've done before, click Update, and the sync should start running. Yep, let's see that it's working right now. So it looks like our second sync has finished running, and we can go back into Salesforce, hit refresh, and see if the last session field is populated for us. Let's see what happens. Looks like it is. We've successfully added an additional field to our report that we forgot to add the first time around. Look at that. All the data we wanted in one place, just like that with the magic of Census. Now, let's switch gears a bit. I won't go through this in as much detail since the process is quite similar to what we saw with setting up Salesforce syncs. But we can go ahead and use the same model we used for our Salesforce sync to create a sync to Amplitude. I've already got my Amplitude connection hooked up to Census, but basically all you need is the API key for an HTTP API data source for your Amplitude project, and you're good to go. So in our scenario, we have some holes in our tracking data. We need to capture an event after the fact, and the event we're interested in is trial start. Luckily, Census can backfill event streams with historical data. Since we need a unique ID column for events and we don't have one readily available in our data, we'll quickly go into our model and add in a new field that concatenates user ID with email as event ID. Let's go ahead and do that now. Just preview the data to make sure everything works and looks good. Perfect. There we go. Save the model. And we're ready to make our Amplitude sync. Once again, we'll select the same model we used to send data to Salesforce. But for where do you want to sync data to, we'll go ahead and select the Amplitude connection and the event object. So the only available behavior for events is append, so we'll leave this part as is. For the unique ID column, we'll go ahead and use that event ID field we just created in the last step of editing the model. And in terms of properties to map, we'll go ahead and add all the matching ones like we did before. It looks like the time field didn't map since we're calling a trial start date. So let's go ahead and add that manually. Finally, we'll choose this backfill all records option. This will do exactly what we're looking to do. Send all records in the current source data to Amplitude. And let's kick off the sync. Looks like it's running. It looks like our sync is finally complete. And if I go into our Amplitude instance, I should be able to look at the daily breakdown of unique trial start users. Let's see if I can get that going. So we'll select trial start as our event. And there we have it. Going forward, if I set this sync on a schedule, I will continue to collect trial start data for my users in Amplitude. And I can even dive deeper into segmentation by including other events or grouping users by other properties. In just a few minutes, I was able to send historical data to my Amplitude instance to enrich any further analysis for my user base. In the last few minutes, let's briefly touch on the segments feature I talked about earlier. With our visual segment builder, you can build complex segmentation logic without any SQL, all on top of the rich, trusted data available in your data warehouse and blessed by your data team. Remember that model we've been working with that I marked as approved earlier? Well, we can make a segment based off that model. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's say I want to make a segment of users that work at a company called Snoodle. I'll go ahead and call this segment Snoodle users based on the model that we've been working with. And then I'll add a condition that the team domain field starts with Snoodle. There we go, starts with. And then I'll hit preview to see if I've selected the correct data. This looks right to me. We can of course add other conditions and build on top of that, but for the sake of this, we'll just save this as our segment. And just like that, I am able to do what I wanted to do, all without SQL knowledge. I can create lookalike audiences based on top spending customers or segment audiences by persona. With Census, you can get your audience ideas into production faster and iterate quickly, even if you don't know any SQL. Awesome. So that was the end of the demo piece. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover every single one of our supported destinations today, though I wish we did, but we'd be here for quite some time. I will mention that another amazing data source that our customers love, data destination, excuse me, is Google Ads. So we have customers using Census to create dynamic audiences based on specific properties and lookalike audiences based on their own best existing customers. And we support Google offline conversions. So you can sync information such as type and amount with customer identifiers, and then you can have consistency between ad channels and internal reporting. So if you really want to talk to us about ad solutions specifically, like I said, apologies we didn't get to that today, but please feel free to follow up with us directly after this webinar. All right, Demetrius, it sounds like we have to have a conversation after this webinar specifically about Google Ads and Facebook ads because we support both. So we can definitely take this offline. Nicholas, sorry, we missed this question. I think it was earlier on. I can just cover this one really quick. You can add custom connections that Census doesn't yet support. There's a couple options for that. There are instructions on our website on how to do that, and there's several ways. You can do webhooks, you can do REST API, and things like that. So that is an option if there is something that we don't have support for out of the box for you.
And then Michael asked, what happens if the Salesforce record has been updated since you last read from it? An example is because it took you 15 minutes to compute the model and write the data.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if the Salesforce record has been updated within Salesforce, but it hasn't been updated within your source, within your warehouse, then obviously Census doesn't know that it's changed in Salesforce, unless you're in the use case that you're using what we call a mirror sync behavior, in which case we basically mirror what's in your warehouse and what's in Salesforce. So the way that Census works is we're writing from your data source to your data destination. We're never writing back from your destination to the data source or your data warehouse. There's other companies that do that, but we don't do that. We focus on reverse ETL. The exception is that specific situation where there's the mirror behavior of exactly what's in the warehouse gets put into Salesforce, and if it's not in the data warehouse and not in the data source, it gets deleted from Salesforce. But there's never a situation in which if something gets updated while the sync is running in Salesforce by somebody manually, that Census will know about it, because that's simply not how the product works. I hope that's what the question was asking.
Michael, let us know if that was a good answer, or we can re-explain it for you. And Nicholas also wants to know, does continuous schedule mean that data is streaming? And then he also asks, what technology do you use for continuous scheduling?
That's a good question too. I mean, the continuous schedule simply just means how often basically Census is pinging, the API for the destination, and how often it's basically sending data through. So I don't think there's a specific technology that I can reference, but we can double check with our engineering team if that would be helpful for you.
And Nicholas, it's not necessarily streaming. It's like a trigger. So you're saying,
Right.
Every 15 minutes, update the destination fields. Or you can say every 15 minutes, every hour, every day, every month, something like that. And there was something else.
Yeah, I thought there was one, but
Nicholas's last question, which was, he didn't catch if we can add data sources that are not integrated with Census. Thank you for reminding me about that.
Yep,
Nicholas.
I think I covered that one while you were in your
Okay.
internet troubles. Yeah, so we do have that option. That we have docs about that, how to set that up. But that is an option if there's something that we don't support straight out of the box.
Okay, perfect. If you have any more questions, we'd love to answer them. So far, you guys have really great questions. Looks like a couple of people are typing. And then after that, we'll just show you a couple more things, and then everyone can move on with their amazing day. Okay, thank you very much, Nicholas, for the great questions. So if you enjoyed this event and it was helpful to you, we also recommend that you look at some of our upcoming events. To do that, you just go to census.com, well, get census.com/events, and then resources events. So upcoming, we have a panel that's leading with operational analytics, which is with our CEO and co-founder, Boris Chabes, and he will be meeting with other people that are experts with Census and reverse ETL in the modern data stack. And lastly, if you are new to Census, this is a really easy way to understand the product. And what's really cool is you can actually run a sync from a data warehouse to a destination, and it results in you getting a t-shirt sent to your doorstep. So it's a really palpable way to understand Census and reverse ETL. I highly recommend it. Just a disclaimer, we only send these t-shirts in North America and Europe. So if you live outside of there, we really apologize. We're getting there soon. And if there's no other questions, then we will end the meeting.
Last call for any questions here.
Oh, yeah, maybe I should explain how to do it. So to do that, you log into app.getcensus. I'm just adding that to the chat. And then when you log into your free trial, you're not adding any credit card or anything like that. On the home screen, it will say sync a swag, and it shows you all the steps super clearly. There's videos to help you get there. So if you're super technical or not technical, you can figure it out and reach out to us as well for help.
Yeah, and if you want, if you want to kind of go back to this demo and reference any part of it, there will be a follow-up email going to you with the recording of this full demo, this full webinar. So you'll have that as a resource as well.
Yes, there will be. Thank you very much, Olia. And with that, we are done. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and we hope to see you at the next event.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.